Among the extraordinary delusions of the human mind, none is more hateful than the conviction cherished among so many sects, that a supreme being can be propitiated by the self-imposed torture of its worshippers. But error is slow to die, and long after the introduction of Christianity, people continued to think that God would not hear them, unless they approached him in blood and tears. At the bottom of it lay a belief that the spirit could be exalted and purified only by contempt of the flesh. Not perceiving that what was demanded of them was a moral and spiritual victory, they sought, by sore treatment of the body, to conquer its sinful appetites. They came to look upon the body as a deadly enemy, the slave and accomplice of the devil, which could be subdued only by a regimen of pain and terror. And so, when an evil suggestion tempted them, they scourged themselves until the blood ran from their mangled flesh, or they plunged naked into the deep winter snow, or barefooted they trod the flinty soil, or they fasted until the exhausted brain sank into the stupor of delirium. We turn from these pictures of human error to put together a few particulars of the sect of the Flagellants, which practiced on a curiously elaborate scale the science of self-punishment. This sect first made its appearance in Italy in 1210. When all Italy was sullied with crimes of every kind, a certain sudden superstition, hitherto unknown to the world, first seized the inhabitants of Perusa, afterwards the Romans, and then almost all the nations of Italy. To such a degree were they affected with the fear of God, that noble as well as ignoble persons, young and old, even children 5 years of age, would go naked about the streets without any sense of shame, walking in public, 2 and 2, in the manner of a solemn procession. Every one of them held in his hand a scourge, made of leather thongs, and with tears and groans they lashed themselves on their backs till the blood ran. All the while weeping and giving tokens of the same bitter affliction, as if they had really been spectators of the Passion of Christ, imploring the forgiveness of God and his mother, and praying that he, who had been appeased by the repentance of so many sinners, would not disdain theirs. All musical instruments and love songs ceased to be heard. The only music that prevailed both in town and country was that of the lugubrious voice of the penitent, whose mournful accents might have moved hearts of flint. Even the eyes of the obdurate sinner could not refrain from tears. Nor were women exempt from the general spirit of devotion we mention, for not only those among the common people, but also matrons and young ladies of noble families, would perform the same mortifications with modesty in their own rooms. Others, who were contaminated with different crimes, confessed them with humility, and renounced their vanities. Jails were opened, prisoners were delivered, and banished persons permitted to return to their native habitations. It seemed as if an universal apprehension had seized mankind, that the divine power was preparing either to consume them by fire, or destroy them by shaking the earth, or some other of those means which divine justice knows how to employ for avenging crimes. Such a sudden repentance, not only the unlearned, but wise persons also admired. They wondered whence such a vehement fervor of piety could have proceeded, especially since such public penances and ceremonies had been unheard of in former times, had not been approved by the sovereign pontiff, nor recommended by any preacher or person of eminence, but had taken their origin among simple persons, whose example both learned and unlearned alike had followed. In 1260, the sect was reconstituted by a hermit of Perugia, and it sprang up with such vigor and alacrity, that its members soon numbered 10,000, who marched in procession, carrying banners and crosses. The folly soon crossed the Alps into Germany, and found its disciples in Bohemia and Poland, Alsace and Bavaria. It was sternly repressed by the different governments, but in 1349, when the plague broke out in Germany, it again lifted up its head. The form of proceedings was always the same. Placing themselves within a circle drawn on the ground, they removed their clothing, until nothing was left but a covering for the loins. Then they walked, with arms outstretched like a cross, round and round the circle for a time, finally prostrating themselves on the ground. Springing to their feet, each struck his neighbor with a scourge, armed with knots and 4 iron points, regulating his blows by his singing of psalms. At a given signal the discipline ceased, and the fanatics threw themselves first on their knees, then flat upon the ground, groaning and sobbing. The leader, on rising, gave a brief address, exhorting them to ask the mercy of God upon their benefactors and enemies, and also on the souls in purgatory. This was followed by another prostration, and then another discipline. Those who had taken charge of the clothes now came forward, and performed the same ceremonies. Penance took place twice a day. In the morning and evening the flagellants went abroad in pairs, singing psalms amid the ringing of bells, and when they arrived at the place of flagellation they stripped the upper part of their bodies, and took off their shoes, wearing only a linen dress from the waist to the ankles. Then they lay down in a large circle in different positions, according to the nature of their crime, the adulterer with his face to the ground, the perjurer on one side, holding up 3 of his fingers, and were then castigated, more or less severely by the master. The flagellants, however, did not secure the favor of the ecclesiastical authorities, who discerned only too clearly the demoralizing effect of their practices and pretensions. Pope Clement VI issued a bull against them, and their influence gradually waned and seemed on the point of dying out, when, in 1414, it was revived. The terrors of the Inquisition were now hurled against the sect, and 91 deluded wretches were burned alive at Sangerhausen, besides numbers at other places. It continued, however, to exhibit occasional signs of vitality, and in the 16th century broke, in France, into 3 great branches: the white, black, and grey penitents, companions of whom were scattered over the whole kingdom, but chiefly in the southern provinces. Catherine de' Medici, at Avignon, in 1574, assumed the lead of the black penitents, and took part in their ceremonies. Henry III, in 1585, established a white penance brotherhood, which paraded in public procession through the streets of Paris. The better members of the clergy preached against the fanaticism, the wits of Paris leveled their ridicule at it, and finally, in 1601, the Parliament of Paris passed an act to abolish a fraternity of flagellants, called the Blue Penitents, and afterwards against all whipping brotherhoods without distinction, declaring the members to be not only heretics, traitors and regicides, but unchaste. The fraternity thereafter declined, and finally disappeared from France.